Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Thank you, Diane. Bill M., that I am. But I want to tell you that I am really a convinced alcoholic, and my name is Bill Moore. All right? The reason I'm going to tell you my whole name is it tells me that I am supposed to protect my anonymity and yours at the level of press, radio, and film. This is at the level of family. All right? If you should come to Santa Rosa, if you should come to Santa Rosa and look for Bill M., you'd have a really difficult time finding me. But if you look for Bill Moore, I'm right there in the phone book. Give me a ring if you should come through. Another reason I give you my full name is because I can remember those old days. And do you notice I didn't say the good old days? But I can remember those old days when they picked me up for drunk and disorderly, drunken in, drunken out, drunken about, drunken beaten up, drunken getting beat up. Not once did they write it up as Bill M., drunken disorderly. Right? They always told you who I was, where I came from, my mother, father, sister, brother, the whole thing. So I feel that the way I'm trying to live my life today, I have absolutely nothing to hide from you, and I want you to know who I am. All right? It is truly by the grace of God and this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm here with you this morning. Because for a drunk of my type, we know where we're supposed to be, were it not for the divine intervention of this fellowship. Looking around here this morning, I get a good feeling. Because I don't know what you expect to get from me, but I want you to know what I get from you. What I feel coming from you is unconditional love. And there is no stronger feeling in the world than that. And that's what I'm going to try to give back to you just a little bit of this morning. Before I get into that, I would like to thank the committee. Diane, Mary, the whole committee, for giving me the opportunity to be here with you. I would also like to acknowledge everyone that had anything to do with this wonderfully run convention this weekend. I think that you've done a tremendous job, and I think that you deserve a round of applause for what you've done. Meeting Diane at the airport, yeah. What she didn't know was the Serenity that she saw was only after I had gone just a little bit berserk. But see, here's the thing that happened. This is an honest program, okay? The thing of it is, you go insane, but it's for shorter periods now, all right? And when I got into the airport, you know, there is still a part of me that feels that I am somewhat unique, that I am somewhat different, and that's why I've got to keep coming back. I figured I'm going to be the only tall black guy, you know, in that airport, so she'll have no problem meeting me, all right? I step off the plane, and there's any number of tall black guys running around there, you know? So as I made that run from baggage to gate, you know, I kept saying, okay, when it's supposed to be, it will. I made my last run, and I said to myself, I'm going to sit down, Paige, and that's going to be it. And I saw this lady walk in the door. She had one hand in her hair like this. I said to myself, that's got to be Diane, all right? Oh, God. And you talk about the way one drunk instantly identifies with another. She looked at me somewhat hesitantly, and she said, Bill? And I said, yes, Diane. And Suzanne was sitting there very coolly, you know, taking it all in. And Suzanne is the one that deserves all the credit for being real cool, calm, and collected. I've heard a lot of people talk here this morning about being nervous. I don't understand what you're talking about. I've only had to sit here and listen to Leonard, had to listen to Martha last night, had to listen to Dennis. I had to listen to all of those terrific speakers. And I want you to know what happens to a person like me when I listen to all of that terrific message that's been laid out here. I have rewritten my talk at least 35 times. Right? I figured, well, maybe I'll just give this crowd Sunday morning a little bit of all of them, you know. But then I got to thinking about Dennis's life. It had been kind of a rough one. I don't know if I want to go through that. And that mustache he's going with, I don't have time to grow one quite like that. All right? And then I thought about Leonard giving us that very simple, down home straight message. And I envied that hat. I'd really like to have that hat. But he wouldn't let me have the hat, so I couldn't give you any of Leonard. So this morning I thought about maybe giving you a little bit of what Martha said last night. And I could get that Texas drawl, but you know, the way she stands with a hand on a hip, I don't think I can get that. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm just going to give you a little bit of me. And I want you to know what I've been doing for the last few minutes here is I've been dealing with my nerves. We alcoholics have a patented way to deal with nerves and everything else. We talk them to death. All right? And that's what I've been doing here. So when you see those old-timers that are roaming around here and you ask them, you know, and there are lots of people here that make it real easy for you to lie, you know. They walk up to you and they'll ask, are you nervous? And you say, of course not, you know. And of course you're lying. But the thing of it is, there's still a part of this alcoholic that does not want you to know what's really going on. But I want you to know that, yes, I am nervous. That's what all of this loose chatter has been about. But now I'm starting to settle down. All right? There's an old man in my life that tells me he first came to AA in 1945, and now he has something like 37 years of uninterrupted sobriety. And old Ted goes out, and I call Ted sponsor, and old Ted goes out and talks every now and then, and I asked him one day, Ted, do you ever get to a place where you don't feel nervous? He thought about it for just a second, and he said, no. I said, so when I'm up there getting nervous, I said, you do that too? He said, yeah. I said, well, God, that feels good. He said, Bill, he said, the day you get up there and you're not nervous, that means that you're starting to BS again. You're starting to lie to those people again. He said, those knocking knees and those sweaty palms are simply God shaking all of the BS out of you so that you can get down to the brass tacks. So that's where we are here this morning. We're getting down to the brass tacks. And you know when you're starting to get your nerves under control is you start to get all of those little suckers to fly in formation. All right? They're all flying in formation now except one. And I'm just going to let him fly wherever he'd like. The reason I'm here with you this morning is because I want to share just a little bit of me. I want to share some of what I've learned since I've been around this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things I felt very strongly was the serenity that this convention and the people that I've been around that you've given me this weekend was when I awakened this morning and I walked out on the balcony on the 7th floor and I watched the sunrise. And what I did was I thought back a few years and I thought about standing on a balcony similar to that, trying to make up my mind whether to jump or not. That's the difference that is here in my life today. I'm not going to stand here this morning and try to tell you when I became an alcoholic, why I became an alcoholic. I'm simply going to state that I am indeed that alcoholic. That's why I introduce myself as a convinced alcoholic. It's because I've given life as a drunk my very best shot, and all I got was more pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. When I came to this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came to you in sheer and absolute desperation. I am not one of those that awakened one morning and felt that my life was in order and I needed to pop into AA and see if I could help a few less fortunate. I came here because I had run out of people, places, and things to blame for where I was. I had blamed everything that you can imagine for the fact that nothing worked in my life as I continued to drink. I had a very good upbringing, so I can't tell you what the criteria is for making a drunk. But if you're born into a home where your father's an ordained minister and your mom is simply his wife, and you know, as I stand here this morning, that about the only hell they ever raised was me, all right? I got all of the love, I got all of the care, I got all of the moral value, I got everything that any individual could ever have. But what I want you to know is that from the very beginning in my life, nothing quite fit. I never felt quite good enough. I never felt as though I really belonged wherever I was. Even in the family that I was born into. When I came along in that family, the youngest child was 16 years old. I was a new kid on the block. I was like a toy, and when I came to you, it was a product of being a spoiled brat. I got all the love, the attention, all the toys, everything that you can imagine, but it was never enough. I always wanted just a little bit more. I always felt that whatever I did, I could have done it better. And I developed the art of embellishing. And that's a sweet way of saying I learned to lie early. All right? I learned how to dress things up real early in my life in order to impress, even at home. And I can remember when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my older brother came home from the military, and he brought with him a wad of those long black licorice sticks, and they gave me one, and they took the rest of them and put them in the closet. I sat and I held my one, and I watched where they put the others. Okay? And here's what I did. As soon as they were busy doing other things, I went into the closet, left the one, and I climbed up the closet shelves, and I got the wad, and I sat there in the closet, and I ate licorice until I threw up. Okay? Does that tell you anything about my personality? All right? I made myself a promise that day that anything that made me feel like that, I would never eat it again. I still don't eat licorice. All right? But I want you to know that something happened to me a little bit later that was almost as devastating, and I never blamed the cause of that. One of the things that I recognized right on as I got into school was that I wanted attention, and I didn't care if it was negative attention as long as I got that attention. And I want you to know that I had a music teacher. Her name was Mrs. King, and I fell madly in love with Mrs. King when I was 8 years old. The fact that Mrs. King was married and probably 35 years older than I never entered my mind. But what I figured was this lady needed the best attention that I could give her. And I had seen a few movies, and I knew the way to get a woman's attention. You took her flowers. Every morning for about 2 weeks, I took Mrs. King flowers. And she thought that I was just the sweetest kid. She patted me on the head, and I loved it. Until Big Mouth Audrey Porter told Mrs. King that I came through the graveyard and got those fresh flowers every morning. It ruined my romance, and I never forgave Audrey Porter. Right? I was a very shy kid. I was one of those people that sat there in those classes, and I sat there in those basketball games, baseball games, and the dances, and I watched everyone doing their thing, and I never did a thing. But here's what I did do. I sat back with my back against the wall, and I nitpicked everyone that dared do anything, because I knew that I could do it twice as well as them. But I was afraid to try for fear that someone might ridicule me. Character assassination right from the beginning. And I never had the nerve to confront anyone, especially girls. And I want you to know that I was really, really aware of girls. But they scared me to death. Oh, God, after that experience with Mrs. King, no more. But something happened when I was 13. This shy kid had a coming out party. This coming out party happened in an alley in Burlington, North Carolina. In this alley was behind a place where every Saturday night we played records and we danced. A couple of the older guys that I hung around with, and I'll tell you why I hung around with the older guys, is because I didn't have to compete. They knew that I was a younger kid, and I got to hang around and live on their coattails. This night they said, "Kid, you're hanging around with us. You're going to be one of us tonight. Do you have any money?" And I went into my pocket and I pitched in my quarter, and they came back into that alley in about half an hour with some of the greatest stuff that I've ever run into. a half gallon of it for 85 cents, and I'm telling you, you talk about the elixir of the gods, that's what we had. Mr. Mac wine. But I want you to know that Mr. Mac there that night did things for me that nothing had ever done before. Our book tells us that we're in the grip of a disease that is threefold. We've got a mental obsession, we've got a physical allergy, and we've got a spiritual, we're lost spiritually. I know about the mental part of it because standing there in that alley that night, the moment they brought that jug in and I got my hands on it, I grew about 6 inches right away. I started getting bigger muscles and I started to get taller and put on weight before I even drank the stuff. All right? By the time I got, and they told me, kid, since this is your first time, we're going to let you knock the top off. And when I turned that jug up, something wonderful happened. My God, did it feel good. As it rolled down, I knew that I was arriving. I didn't know where I was coming to or where I was coming from, but I had arrived that night. All right? The older guys had to take that jug away from me standing in that alley that night. That night I found something that was greater than anything I'd ever experienced. And after I'd had a couple of slugs out of that jug, I went inside and I looked around at the girl that I'd been so afraid of, and I asked her to dance. And I danced with my first girl that night. Yeah, Mr. Mac Wine, she and I. And if you can imagine a combination of Peg Leg Bates, Gene Kelly, and Fred Astaire all mixed into one and slightly drunk, that was me that very first night. You see, I had learned to dance with the door and a broom. They didn't complain about being stepped on or being jerked around. If you're ever through Burlington, North Carolina, and you see a beautiful little lady there, 1 foot, she's still hobbling a little, okay? That's the girl that I danced with that first night. I only danced with her once. Do you realize that I met my first girl that night, danced with my first girl that night, and got slapped by my first girl that night? You see, that wine told me that I had already evolved into everything I wanted to do, and I made a proposal to that lady there that night, and I thought it was the greatest thing that could have happened to her. She did not agree. All right? And there was some turkey standing over beside the jukebox that called her sister that did not agree with the way I approached her. He made some kind of disparaging remark like back off, and that was something that he shouldn't have done. And I took a swing at him, and I want you to know that there that night I had my first fist fight. Yeah, I came of age. That night I lost my first fist fight. All right? Mr. Mac Wine and I. That night I met the police for the very first time that night. That night I went to jail for the first time that night. That night I had my very first blackout. That night I threw up all over everything that night. That night I promised that I would never, ever do it again. That night. And for the next 25 years, I kept saying that I would never, ever do it again. And I don't want you to think that I left there and immediately started to drink day in and day out, but the progression of our disease led me from that point to the day that I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous to be on a downhill path that led me into what our book calls pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. God, I love that word. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. That sentence says so much. Before I got here, I didn't know about all of that. I knew that it was hell. That's all that I knew. You see, as my alcoholism progressed, I knew full well that all I needed to do was to make certain changes. If only I could get people, places, and things in the right place, and if they stayed just where I put them, my life would be okay. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not get people, places, and things to stay as I wanted them. What I tried to let everyone know that came into contact with me is that I was a little bit different. I tried to let them know that I deserved special consideration. I actually felt that the world owed me a little bit more than it owed anyone else. And this is the way I went through life, expecting everything from people, places, and things, but giving absolutely nothing. I wanted to sit back and wish and hope and think and have all of the good things happen, and nothing happened but more of my drunkenness. I went through the process of going into the military, and the military didn't quite suit me because they had silly rules that they expected me to adhere to. I was lucky enough to get in there and get out, and I knew what my problem was. All I needed to do was to get some stabilizing force into my life, marry. And I found this beautiful little girl, and I lied to her. I promised her the moon, the stars, and a couple of satellites. And she bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and we got married. Or, correctly, she got married. The day of the wedding, my brother had to put the ring on because I dropped it 3 times because I was so drunk. And I want you to know that this marriage lasted for 11 years. And would you believe that this lady kicked me out of her life? I gave her the best drunken 11 years that she could ever have, and she kicked me out. And I want you to know that at that time I felt horribly betrayed. How could she? At this time, my life has started on that downhill plane where I'm starting to do things that even I can't understand or accept. And there are times that I talk to this God of mine, the one that I was very, very fearful of, and I would say, if there is a God there, I want you to make this go away. There have been times that I have sat there with a fifth of booze on the table, and I would pour out a shot. And you know, a shot for us is a water glass about like that. And I would say, okay, if you don't want me to have it, make it go away. Yeah. And there were times that I would even sit sometimes for 10 whole seconds while he made it go away. All right? And nothing happened, and I drank it, and I knew that there was no God. And as all of these horrible things started to happen in my life, I could not understand why people, places, and things were so down on me. How this woman could kick me out. How the places that I had once been a primary force behind in business, I no longer was any force there. I actually went in there and worked for them. I could not understand how all of this was happening in my life. I couldn't understand how those contracts that I had with General Electric, Western Electric, and places like that, I couldn't understand why those plant managers were telling me, Mr. Moore, we don't think that we need your services anymore. You see, they were all down on me. There were bad things happening. You see, I got executivitis real quick. Things got good, and I became that executive. And as an executive, that meant that my lunches stretched sometimes from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I got very little done, but I expected everyone to be right on the mark. And after I had lost it all, after I had watched a marriage go down the tubes, and there might be some of you here this morning that can identify with seeing everything that you care about, everything that you love, watching it slowly slide away, knowing full well that you can do better and actually wanting to do better, but for some reason you can't pull it together, only for very short periods. I can remember vividly what it's like sitting down with myself in my bottle saying, what is wrong? And I can remember going to talk to my father and saying, Pop, everything is falling apart. I need help. And all this man told me is that, son, you need to get God in your business. What I needed was a check, all right? And he wanted me to get God in my business. Right? As I watched everything slide away, as I watched a woman that I loved, as I watched the look in her eyes turn it first to questions, then surprise, then mild disgust, and then I watched it turn to fear. And as I had to sit time after time and beg her to let me back in, and I want you to know something. Each time I did that, I meant it. If you will just give me one more chance, I'll never do it again. And I would be good 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then I would celebrate. Sometimes she would tell me, Hon, you've been good. 1 beer. And you know how it is when you're going to have 1 beer? We are very, very frugal-minded people. If I'm going to go out and have 1 drink, it does not make sense to go to a bar and pay $2 for 1 drink. I'm only going to have one, but I'll buy a half a gallon. It's more economical that way. So when I went to get that one beer, I bought 6. All right? Brought the one in the house and showed it to her with the 6 in the car. All right? And then she told me I could have one more. I went and bought another 6-pack, brought the one in. All right? You know how many of that left in the car, don't you? And it was somewhere that evening that I was right back where I had started. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I want you to know that when it was finally all over and she kicked me out, that was the beginning of my being here with you. Because I want you to know what had happened to my thinking. I was so wrapped up in me, everything was I, me, mine, that when she kicked me out, and those unthinkable highway patrolmen, isn't it amazing how they have absolutely nothing to do but follow you around, all right? And I'll tell you how far I took that once. I told my kid brother, tell you what, I know they're out to get me. You drive my car, I'll drive yours. He drove my car for 3 weeks, didn't get stopped once. I got stopped the first night in his car. But it was still those lousy highway patrolmen that were picking on me. The fact that I was drunk nearly 24 hours a day did never enter my mind. And when I looked around at all of my world that had slowly slid away, all of those unthinkable people, all of those very insensitive souls that had taken everything away from me, that had been so down on me, I hatched a plan that would allow me to get even. That plan told me that if I committed suicide, as they filed past my casket, I would have the last laugh. Does that tell you where my thinking was? All right? I got no argument with step 2. All right? And I tried this old suicide thing, and it did not work. And if you can imagine the anger and the frustration, the bitterness that I felt at God and everything when I came to in a hospital emergency room, it was absolute and total. I couldn't do anything right. And from that point, I never tried an overt act of suicide again. But what I did was I drank until I was physically full, and I prayed to pass out and just never come to. You see, the things that were happening in my life, I could no longer live with it. I had reached that place in my life where I knew that I could not live without drinking, and I couldn't continue to live if I kept drinking. My book calls that the jumping off place. And I did one last thing, and that was to take my last geographic, and I ran away from home at age 34. And I came to California. And I'll tell you why I came to California. It's because I've read lots of books about California, and I'd seen lots of movies, and I knew that there were a lot of weirdos in California, and I knew that I could get out there and I could blend right in and fade right away, and no one would ever notice. And I came to California on an $80,000 vehicle, Greyhound bus. I left home with a ticket for $88 and 14 days unlimited travel. I was going to see the world. And I got kicked off the bus twice between the Carolinas and California. I was left in Reno. I was kicked off in Omaha. And I want you to know something. Has anyone here ever tried to puke with dignity? You simply can't do it. As you're riding along, people have a tendency to frown on you turning a bottle up. But we were coming through some place in Wyoming, and everyone was looking out the window. I said, this is the time to get a quick drink. And I had my vodka in my suitcase, and you know why I had the vodka, because you can't smell it. All right? And I had my vodka in that suitcase with just enough underwear to keep the bottles from rattling together. And as I turned that bottle up, the boss did one of these things. The vodka, 100 proof, went in here, up there, and it came out. It fell everywhere. All right? And as you sat there on the bus trying to be cool and dignified as you throw up and you're straining and you're crying, yeah, that's where I was. And I finally fell into Vallejo, California, fell off the bus looking for a drink. And that's where I found life. You see, all those times back home, I had this family of mine. Mother, father, sister, brothers, wives, friends that always ran under me. They never let me hit that bottom. You see, I'd always gone to those places where they would give me psychological evaluations, a few of those little white pills and nice smooth injections, and I sat there and I looked at those people and I lied to them, and I defied them to fix me. You've got our money, fix me. Needless to say, it never worked. I found out, like Martha did, in most of those places, they figured out because of the way I had been potty trained, all I needed was to raise my Valium level and I would be okay. All right? But it didn't work. And when I fell for the last time here in California, I said something different this time. And I woke up one morning on a dirty mattress in an apartment that really smelled because its only occupant smelled. I said something that morning was, God, help. I didn't put any strings on it. I didn't have any time limits on it. I simply wanted help. And this was the first exposure I had to Alcoholics Anonymous. There were neighbors that had been concerned about not seeing me, and they called that number that you put in the paper. And a couple of people came out and talked to me. They probably sat there and they talked to me for 3-4 hours. But I heard them say one thing: you don't have to hurt like this anymore. And that was the thing that I heard. And you know how everyone else in my life had gotten off on the wrong foot? Those two people that came from AA, they kind of got off on the wrong foot with me too. Because these people sat there and told me that I didn't have to hurt. And they told me that because of the state that I was in, I needed to be looked after 24 hours a day. That's where I was. And they told me that we would like to take you to the Solano County detox. And I agreed. And then they wouldn't let me drive. All right? When I went into treatment, I weighed 138 pounds. You see, the wife, the child, had left again, and I had been told that I would never see that child again as long as I was drunk. He left me in October. I came into the fellowship in November, and by the grace of God in this fellowship, since November 23rd, 1975, I have not had a drink or anything else like I used to have. The miracle of this program is working. The thing that really got to me, and it still amazes me how it works, I do not understand it, but the way one drunk can walk up to another drunk and simply touch them and tell them, I understand. And somewhere in the gut of that drunk understands that that other person does understand. I want you to know that I went through this Solano County detox, which is non-medical. This is one of those places where you sit, you lay, you kneel, you do whatever you've got to do. You shiver, you shake, and you know what the other S is. And for the first time in my life, I had the opportunity to see me. Always before, I could always say, if I get that bad, I will quit. Or if I should get that bad, when I look like that. But I sat there in this detox, and I saw me for the first time in my life. There in that detox, I felt those little green things that comes out of the wall sometimes, as they crawl up your legs, and wherever they touch, the big red welts break out. You itch like crazy, and you feel them crawling in your hair. And all it took for me was one drunk to walk over and say, Bill, I understand. It'll be okay. Always before, when I felt those little green things, they were always green for me. When I felt those little green things, I knew that I needed an injection of something, or a few of those little white pills, or a couple of capsules, or another drink. Those people told me there in that detox, and they were all AA members, they said, Bill, you can leave here now if you'd like, but you're going to have to live through this hell again. He guaranteed me there that night that if I would stay and work through that hell once, I would never have to live through it again, as long as I never drank. And that old man kept his promise. I never had another drink, and I've never had to go through that hell again. And out of this Solano County detox and into AA, it was a direct trip for me. This is when AA members came into AA, and they did not have the luxury of roaming around in the back of the room trying to decide whether they were high bottom, low bottom, wide bottom, no bottom, or whatever bottom. This is when you walked into AA and some old timer met you at the door, and he would shake your hand, give you half a cup of coffee, and say, "My name is Harold, and I'm your sponsor." Right? That's what I got. That's what I got when I walked into the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I told that old man, in so many terms, so many words, "You can't be my sponsor because you can't understand me." You see, Harold was white. Harold had beautiful blue eyes. Harold could not possibly understand me. And those beautiful blue eyes that I'm talking to you about, when I told Harold that, those beautiful blue eyes turned icy cold. And I still got an indent right here where that old man thumped me in the chest, and he told me that he didn't care if I was from hell, Yale, jail, or a combination of all three. He said, "I don't care if you're old, young, somewhere in between." He said, "I don't care if you're black, white, or somewhere in between." And he said, "I don't care if you're man, woman, or somewhere in between." He said, "If your problem is alcohol, we've got a solution. And from what you tell me, you've got a real problem, kid." And I sat there, and I want you to know that for the next 6 months, that old man and I had deep conversations. He talked, and I listened. All right? Told me the only thing that I could say was that my name was Bill and I was an alcoholic. And I learned to say that well. And Martha, you're absolutely right. Maybe I was just sick enough, but whatever it was, I didn't argue. And by golly, it has worked for me. I think that this old line of sponsorship, this old line of giving this program away, is something that we need to safeguard. Because the only thing that stands between the drunkenness that I lived in and this new life that I'm living today was being able to listen, being able to hear what was being said. I came to you because my life was in total disorder, because I had absolutely no plan for life, because I had no goals and no purpose. I felt like from the very earliest of times that everyone in this world was a part of a big play, a big stage production. Everyone had been given a little script, and they had, at the top of that script was an X, a Y, an O, a Z, an A, or whatever, and that's where they were supposed to stand, and they were supposed to read from that script. I did not have that script. That's why I bounced around through life as that tornado, as an unguided missile, carrying death and destruction wherever I went. Heartbreak, disillusionment, and stealing from people. Not in the sense of stealing money, but stealing trust, stealing faith, stealing emotions. And I walk in here to you, and that old man that met me at the door gave me another present. He gave me this. This, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is my script. This is what tells me where to stand, what to say, how to feel, what to think, and how to go about getting it. My problem, as you told me, was that I lacked power. The reason I lacked power is because I had a power in my life. It was me and alcohol. When they both failed, I had absolutely nothing. I came here, and I want you to know that the first power that I had was that old man named Harold. And if you talk about having coincidence, divine providence, or just God's big plan, when I stumbled into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that little old man that met me at the door that couldn't understand me, after we talked for a little bit, I found out that old Harold was born less than 50 miles from where I was born. We had driven our cars off of those crowned roads in the Carolinas into the same wheat fields, into the same cornfields. We had been in the same jails. All right? Many, many years later, so you tell me whether there was a power working in my life or not. I have absolutely no doubt that the reason that I am here with you today is because my God has a plan for me. Something else that I am very, very much convinced of is the fact that my life is absolutely and totally none of my business. You see, I had control of it once. Look at what happened. You tell me to let go and let God, and this is what's happening to me. Bob and I were talking a little bit earlier. Isn't it amazing? As soon as I let go of the control, the good things start to happen. Yeah. And all I need to do is look at the way our program is put together. I don't think that it's coincidence or chance that our steps are numbered the way they are. Maybe that's why it is suggested that we take them 1, 2, 3, and right through that order. We've all been willing to take the exercise that most alcoholics know a lot about, which is jumping to conclusions. And when we jump to conclusions in AA, what you get there is something like a two-stepper. Any number of us come into this fellowship, and we take the first part of step 1, and then we drop down to 12, the bottom half, and we start going out trying to carry our message. And I want you to hear our message. What I want to talk to you about is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, the one that those old-timers taught me, the one that tells me there in step 1 that I am totally powerless. And the reason they had me go through that is because I felt that I did have power. They had me take a look at what alcohol had done in my life. They had me take a look at what I had done in the lives of other people. And after looking at that with some honesty, asked me if I thought that I could manage my own life. And Harold let me talk every now and then. I could say yes and no. And when he asked me, after he had talked to me for a while and had me go through this book, if I thought I could manage my life, I said no. He said, okay, Bub, now we get into step 2. And do you know, for someone that has wanted to die and look up at people and get revenge, when I hit step 2, do you know I had problems with that? Talking about my insanity. But Harold made it clear to me that my insanity was not so much my silliness of wanting to die and get revenge, but the fact that I continued to drink when it was killing me and could not see that I kept doing the same thing and hoping for different results. That's the insanity of alcoholism that Harold wanted me to see. When we did our countdown here last night, I was glad to see all the new people here. That means that there is someone to continue this legacy of one drunk talking to another. But I'm going to tell you something, you new people that are here tonight, be careful. Watch those old-timers. If you aren't careful and you hang around them, they will ruin your misery. They will teach you how to live as a human being. Watch them carefully. Because they're going to sit and they're going to talk to you about how they've done things, and you're going to agree. And then they're going to start to talk to you about the insanity of their drinking. And if you're an alcoholic or worse, you're booze, you're not going to let some old buzzard sit and tell you that you're crazy. He's crazier than you are. You're going to admit to your craziness too. All right? And then they've got you. All right? They've got you. They're going to look you straight in the eye and they're going to say, if you cannot handle alcohol, you're powerless over it, your life is unmanageable, you can't manage yours or anybody else's, and you're crazy, they're going to tell you you need help. And I want you to know that that help that they start to talk about is all contained in step 3. Steps 1 and 2, they're asking us to look at things and start to make a few comparisons. Step 3, they asked us to make a decision to turn our will and our lives. And the first thing I said when I was told this, turn my will and my life over, no way. But what I was thinking about was my smarts, my intellect. I had forgotten about the hell, the insanity that I'd just come through in step 3. When I made that decision to turn my will and my life over, something wonderful happened. I knew at that point a calmness in my gut. I knew a freedom that I had never known before. Knowing who was really in charge took all of the hassle out of my life.
This is what I owe to this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You have given me the knowledge that I need to evaluate myself with the loving help of sponsor and a group full of people, to take a look at what I can do, what I cannot do, to learn about my limitations, to make that decision to turn all of my character defects and that twisted will of mine, to turn it over and to allow God to walk into my life. As I told you, my father was an ordained minister. And since I am junior, there were a couple of those old aunts and cousins that said, boy, one day you're going to grow up and be like your daddy. All right? You're going to be a preacher. Well, I told them what I thought of that. And I turned out to be the worst or the best drunk, whichever way you want to look at it. But when God is working in your life, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So here I am on a Sunday morning in Mesa, Arizona, standing behind this thing here with a gleam in my eye talking to you about God. All right? You see what I mean? My life is none of my business. What you've given me through those first 3 steps is identity. I know who I am. I am an alcoholic. I am convinced of that, and I am powerless. The only power I have is the power of the decision to turn my will and my life over. And in that step, great things started to happen. Martha, Dennis, everyone talked to you about those connecting steps. Going into step 4, there is no way you can do a fearless moral inventory if you are alone. There is no way you can sit down and accurately look at your character defects without the help of this God. And I want you to know, for you people that might be having a problem with this God bit, if you take the God bit out of it, then all you've got is your will once again. If you are having difficulties in your life today, look at who is in charge. If you want to feel this openness, this loving feeling, this freedom that I've experienced, then break out the key. This step is the key of willingness. You can open that door and you can step through it into the best life that you've ever had. With God in charge of my life, I've been able to accomplish something that I have never been able to accomplish before, to live one day at a time without drinking. I do believe today that God has allowed me to reach the highest pinnacle that any drunk can ever reach, and that's sober. And I think that after going through the hell that I've lived through, the hell that I can identify with from each one of you, to know that there is a solution is the greatest thing that's ever gone. Being useful, being one of God's kids simply, is the greatest feeling in the world. You stop and think about it. When I don't have to be tall, short, male, female, black, white, green, or anything else, but just one of God's kids, think about the feeling of freedom. Okay? We hear a lot about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would like to share my feelings on the program. I have heard about everyone's program, and I've watched some people fail miserably working their program. I think that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is contained in chapters 5, 6, and 7. In chapter 5, the very first line is, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path." Now, this isn't to say that the rest of the book is not important, But I think that chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 are there to help me identify, to help me look at the fact that there is a solution, to give me more information about alcoholism, and to explore the need for a power in my life. After chapter 4, I should be convinced. That's the wording. How it works tells me that if I want this change in my life, this is how I'm supposed to do it. It talks to me about half measures. It talks to me about trying to hang on to my old ideas. Once we've made the decision that this is what we want, and we've started to work through some of our grosser defects, it talks to us about getting into action. Chapter 6. Taking this knowledge that we've found and taking chapter 5, step 5 in chapter 6, and starting to get into action to clear away some of the wreckage of our past. Once we've started to clear that wreckage away, and I know that there are people here that probably said the same thing that I did. If there is all of this stuff that has happened, why must I clear it away? I won't do it anymore. I'll talk to God about it. And I remember asking old Harold, I said, why have I got to go back to some of those people? I don't think that's absolutely necessary. And once again, those eyes turned real cold, and there are a couple of more thump places here. And he said, Bub, you are not doing it for them. You're doing it for you. He told me that the only way I could have one of the most precious things I have today, and that is right now. The only way I can have right now is I've got to clear away the wreckage of that past. If I am sitting here wondering, feeling guilty, or anxious about anything that happened over there or back yonder, then I am not concentrating on today. And as I work through getting that wreckage cleared away, then it comes around to our 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message and practice these principles in all of our affairs. And this is where the fun comes in. I want you to know that the reason I never wanted to accept anything from anyone was because I feared payback. I didn't want to feel beholding. But that's changed. I feel very beholding to you, and I enjoy this process of payback. Because what you told me is that whatever I've gotten from you, if I like it and I want to keep it, then there are certain things that I must do. And that means giving it back. And that's what you allow me to do in step 12. Oh, I can remember the days coming into this fellowship when the ego roared and I wanted to be the secretary of the group, knowing full well that I could be a better secretary than anyone else had ever been. And my sponsor telling me, sit down and shut up. And I can remember actually campaigning to be the coffee maker until Harold found out about it. And I can remember at 6 months being elected the coffee maker. And I can remember the absolute fear at having that responsibility of coffee maker. And I want to tell you what I did very briefly. Something that Bill Moore, the alcoholic, has always done. I've always been a people pleaser. When I got that job as coffee maker, I wanted to make sure that I pleased everyone there. And I went around my group, which was a fairly large group, and I asked everyone there, how do you like your coffee? And I got about 12 different ideas for making coffee. And I tried to incorporate all of them. And I brewed up a pot of stuff there that had everything from salt to eggshells in it. Half the group threw up, the other half wanted to throw me out. After that dismal failure, I ran to Harold with my tail tucked. And I said, Harold, I can't please all these people. I said, they are impossible. His eyes got cold again. couple of more thump marks right here. And he pulled me into the kitchen and he asked me to tell him how I'd made that coffee, and I ran through it. And then I stood back for his approval. He said, "Bub, get the coffee can." Got the coffee can. He said, "Set it on the table." He said, "Turn it around and tell me what it says right there." I said, "Directions." Oh. He told me, "Bill, if you want to make a success of whatever you're doing, read the directions." All right? I read those directions and I made a pot of coffee and I got not one complaint. Yeah. And from that day to this, I've learned to read the directions. For my life, it's just as important that I read the directions. When that old man gave me this book, he gave it to me with instructions. That he wanted me to start on page 1 of this book, and he told me that everything I didn't need to know about Alcoholics Anonymous was on the first 2 pages. The first 2 pages are blank. All right? He told me that from that point on, he wanted me to read every line in this book, chew it up and digest it, and then he stopped me with that finger in my chest again, and he said, "Bill, I only want you to read the black portion, nothing between the lines." All right? Based on that, I have learned to read these directions. And the results of reading these directions is what allows me to be here with you on a weekend like this, because I have learned to follow directions. Today I have absolutely no doubt, no qualms about who is in charge of my life. Today I know that God is doing for me what I simply could not do for myself. Somewhere we all must come to the realization that what we are doing is either working or it's not. If you don't want what you've got anymore, then come on and get what we've got. There's one catch. You've got to get it the same way we got it. One day at a time and reading the directions. Those directions have led me on an ever-widening spiral of friends. The things that I knew that I could never do, I have found that with the help of God in you, those things are happening today. I can sit here and look out in this place and I can see friends that I've known for years. And for a drunk like me that had no friends, not even a good feeling about my own self, that indeed is a miracle. That is part of this gift of sobriety. God in you has allowed me to make the changes that I needed to make, to be one of you. I am the drunk that roamed around the world trying to change people, places, and things. And you told me simply to change my mind, and my world would change. Today, by the grace of God and this fellowship, my mind is changing. It's something that I must work on a daily basis, but it is changing, and so is my life. Today I know the freedom that only having a sense of a higher power can give. Today I know what it's like to dream and not get lost in the dream. Today I know what it's like to face calamity, tragedy, and not get lost into it. My father died in 1971. And were it not for a few pieces of paper that I've got, I wouldn't know when he died. And I wouldn't know a lot about the details because I was drunk. because I blocked it all out. The miracle that you have given me is the strength of conviction that there is a power in my life that works. Allowed me to live through one weekend where everything I thought that could not happen did. I've got one sister. I got a call and it said that she was sick and that I should come home. I made the plans, got on a plane on a Thursday, went home. My sister died en route. 3 days after my sister died, the shock was so bad, my mom had a stroke and died. The old days, I would have gone on a rampage, I would have gotten drunk, and I would have hit someone or a lot of people. This time, because of what you told me, I made a telephone call, and I told the sponsor, I hurt. He asked me if I prayed about it, and he said, go to a meeting. He told me to say the Serenity prayer and go to a meeting. And I did. And I learned that I can accept God's will, not mine. That's the miracle of this program. The things that I can't do, God allows it to happen and allows me what I need to work through it. I think that we are indeed a lucky and very fortunate group of people as long as we remember to be grateful. In closing, I'd like to share something that my sponsor gave me before he died, my first sponsor. This is something that he lived by, and I would like to share it with you. 'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste much time on that old violin. But he held it up with a smile. What am I bidding, good folks? He cried. Who will start the bidding for me? $1, $1, two, only two, $2, and who'll make it three? $3 once, $3 twice, going for three. But no. From the room far back, a gray-haired man came forward and he picked up the bow. Then wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening a few of the loose strings, he played a melody that was pure and sweet as the caroling angels sing. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, what am I bidding for the old violin? And he held it up again with his bow. $1,000, and who'll make it two? 2,000, and who'll make it three? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice. And going and gone, he said. The people cheered, but some of them cried. We do not quite understand. What changed its worth? And swift came the reply. The touch of the Master's hands. And many a human with life out of tune and battered and scarred with sin is auctioned cheap to the thoughtless crowds, just like that old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and we travel on. We're going once, we're going twice, we're going, and we're almost gone. But the Master came, and the foolish crowds never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the Master's hands. May God continue to bless you, and thank you for having me here this weekend.